euro effectiveness until Greece collapsed, and then this evolved into a thesis later on. On the way, I think this from the way how the way this thing affected the whole member states of the European Union. The members of the Committee of International Trade in the European Parliament are having now a strong debate about BRICS, about Brazil, Russia, China and India. And they are approximately by 2050, they will be booming, and they are booming even now, and they will be the most powerful states in the world. This is at least what economists think and ended up with. So how do you think that Euro affects European Union and the three states that are using euros, not officially as members of Eurozone, by keeping the European Union and Europe as a whole a competitive player in the international arena?
I think it's a generally very good question. I mean, the first part, the looking at some of the dynamic economies elsewhere in the world, is exactly the point I made before. Let's look at those countries where it works well and see whether we can draw the right lessons from it. I think that for any country makes a lot of sense to analyze very carefully that what's happening elsewhere and then see to which extent you can take advantage of that. The second point, and we get into, I think, the broader discussions on the costs and benefits of a fixed exchange rate regime. And Euroization, of course, is the most dramatic form of a fixed exchange rate regime. And in the end, it can go either way. If you do it right, a fixed exchange rate regime or adopting another currency requires you to approach the structural reform agenda head-on. You have to do all the right things because the detours, the easy responses, you don't have at your disposal. You can't just inflate your way out of your debt position or force a depreciation of your currency, which is what many countries have done. That might help short-term, but has immense long-term costs, and you get sort of onto a trajectory that is not healthy at all. I mean, if you agree and decide on the constraints of a fixed exchange regime, essentially you promise that you will do all the tough reforms, take the difficult political decision when you need to, because you do not have any other options. If you do that, you make your economy stronger, you build the foundations to be successful. And if you look at the countries within the Eurozone, there are currently 17 former members of the Eurozone. I mean, some countries have done extremely well under these constraints, have done the reforms early on, done the homework, and they're benefiting from it now. And we've got 10 years of experience with it. Others have not. And then, so if you go back and then look at the more successful and compare those against the less successful countries, I mean, in the end, you come back to, yes, you have been too late or have not been willing at all to address the structural challenges head on. So, in the end, it is or can be a very, very powerful anchor in moving your economy forward. Partly because the risk of failure is really high. And there we are back in Greece.
You don't have a follow-up question. Anybody else has a question? Would you mind taking the question of journalists as well? We have several journalists who have questions.
I will do a question in Albanian. Sorry for this.
Do you want to translate or? I'll translate.
Bedalla Sadiu prej RTK-s. Kom si më na tregu cila është fusha që duhet me u fokusu Kosovë për me zhvillu, për me arrit mu integru në tregun evropian, pas parasysh edhe krizën që ekziston në vetë Evropë.
What is the industry the Kosovo concentrated in lost, so it can compare and integrate it in the European markets?
Edhe realisht, çka duhet në mënyrë urgjente të ndryshoj për me u zhvillu kjo fushë?
And what should be changed immediately, so this field, this industry should start now?
And the general answer is there are no quick fixes. There are no immediate solutions to all the problems. So everything in terms of reforms and preparation takes time. So a little bit of patience and in any reform in general will always be required. I think in terms of looking at potential engines of growth over the medium to longer term horizon, the situation in Kosovo is not unlike that of many other countries in the region. Clearly the energy sector is and will remain one of the critically important sectors that will support the economic development in Kosovo and in the countries of the Western Balkans, possibly including Greece. So this entire region, I think, has, for different reasons, advantages that make this an area of a great deal of promise. Any development in this sector generally is very complicated because it's very multifaceted. There's no one single source of energy that is perfect. All of them have costs and benefits. And you see, I think partly for that reason, in all of the countries there's a very active public debate on which source of energy to base future developments. That is good, that is healthy, because any decisions that you will take have long-term impacts. Yeah.
Yes, the microphone.
I'm Ludo Berti, I'm a research fellow here at AUK. I wanted to expand a little bit more on the issue of productivity growth and economic development here in Kosovo that the journalist just asked on, and which you dwelled on in passing towards the end of your talk. You mentioned that one of the key priorities for economic development in Kosovo is to increase productivity, and I would very much agree with you on that, in particular considering that the figures of growth over the past 10 years have to be looked on against a backdrop of the process of deindustrialization that Kosovo has suffered over the past 20 years, very much like the, well, I would say Albania, but in general the post-communist world. But I would argue that Kosovo, and in particular Albania, have suffered from deindustrialization in the most, very acute form. And you said that foreign direct investment holds out the greatest promises of boosting competitiveness and productivity in this country. But there are two hurdles on the way when one thinks of FDI as a growth strategy. One has to do with attracting investment in the first place. And I do not think that having a strong regulatory structure, having strong institutions is a sufficient condition to attracting investment. And anyway, that condition is not satisfying because the institutional and regulatory framework, as my colleague has remarked, is very weak in Kosovo on many grounds. But for instance, if one considers the mining sector in this country, which has marked the political economy of Kosovo very deeply in the past, and if one takes structure, there are enormous investments that need to be deployed and enrolled before we can consider FDI coming into this country. And I'm thinking essentially about environmental remediation projects that have to be undertaken. Obviously, the World Bank has been involved in the land reclamation and cleanup project at Kosovo A, but what are the prospects for Trepča? And the second point is capturing the benefits from FDI. Having growth in FDI cannot be an end in itself, because investors can come in, invest, bring in capital, export everything, pay very little tax and transfer very little technology. So there should be, the World Bank has traditionally been averse to industrial policy measures, but what are the prospects in the policy thinking in the World Bank in Kosovo to make sure that the benefits of FDI are actually captured in the economy of Kosovo?
That is a really complex question that could warrant a 20-page paper. So let me try to answer this short. I think the more you get, the more benefits out of foreign direct investment. The longer the time horizon is that the investor thinks he or she will be active here. And then I think when we talk about the quality of investment, the quality of investors, that's what you want. If someone decides that this is the site for production, or for providing services for the long haul, the technology, the know-how, the funds will remain here. If it's just an investment to take the quick profit and disappear, you might end up being in a worse position than you were before, because now you're left with the legacies of such a decision. So again, it comes back to this overarching mantra that the business investment climate and these various aspects that define what business investment climate is have to be tackled one by one. And for example, from our end, we've just launched a project on land administration cadastre. Critical part of all of this. It's just one puzzle piece, but a critically important one. It is important because if you have a legally clear title, that increases your incentives to formalize your activities. Because with that, it gives you access to capital. And with access to capital, you can invest and grow and sort of build on what you've done before. If you do not get that part regularized, there's probably no real incentives to sort of move from where you are. You have your little informal enterprise, you will just survive and continue on that basis, but there's no growth coming from that. So picking all of these various puzzle pieces that are not working yet, fixing them one by one, I think in the end will contribute to this. Like so often, and it's very difficult to have a clear, you probably have no clean regression results if you take sort of single reforms, because in the end, often it's the weakest link that helps everything back. Sometimes you need the compound effects of several reforms to make it work. So you take the land administration, then you need the regulatory legal framework for developing a mortgage market, the interbank settlement systems. I mean, if you take then 3, 4, 5, 6 reforms that are linked to that, and suddenly there's a big jump upwards. I think for that reason, we often do see that if you take a former crisis country, it is not sort of a gradual improvement, it is often sort of a relatively dramatic increase from being a really poor performing economy to one that performs really, really well. So you have relatively big jumps. And I think that's where in designing and sequencing policy reforms, you try to put those elements together that sort of then in the end form a policy area that sort of then work together, and then you have one bigger part of the constraints resolved, and then hopefully you can see some impact from that.
Okay. Brian will have a last question because we are close, coming to close.
I work in the energy centre here at AUK, so I was very interested in what you had to say, of course, how for any economic growth there must be consistent, reliable, quality power supplies. And for Kosovo, as Kosovo looks towards investment in renewables, especially wind power, this is good. But I'm thinking now of bulk power. and the enormous assets that Kosovo has with its coal resources and the development of clean coal technology, how do you advise the government of Kosovo regarding improving its bulk power supply in order to promote the growth of the economy? How do you advise the government to attract investors in this crucial area for the economy? Thank you.
This is a really tricky question, partly because I cannot answer you at this point. We will hopefully very soon be able to be more communicative in these questions, partly because the energy debate related to fossil fuels and the plans and the discussions that we've had with the government of Kosovo in this area were drawn into the global debate on climate change. It was linked to the ILA-16 replenishment and suddenly became a really big institutional issue. As you know, we just had a few weeks ago a panel of experts that came to Kosovo and looked to which extent the plans are consistent with a set of criteria that the World Bank has defined, where possibly on an exceptional basis we still could support fossil fuels. I don't know what the report is, whether there is there's no decision being made on what, as an institution, we can support. And I would like, I'm looking forward to engaging you in this debate. And I think that will happen very soon, but I ask for your understanding that at this point, I'm not.
It's just, I find that, so it's rather like when Mrs. Clinton went to India earlier this year, and she addressed the Indian government on the whole question of global climate change, and of course their economy, like the United States, is highly dependent upon coal-fired power, similar to Kosovo, very much the same. And yet the world recognizes that India must have economic growth at the forefront of its policy. And so the Indian Prime Minister advised Mrs. Clinton that, hey look, this is India, not the United States. And so similar, it seems a very tough approach to Kosovo, whilst its economy is much closer to India than Germany. And so whilst the economic growth is so crucial, to treat India in the same way as the rest of the US or European Union, it has much closer parallels to the urgent needs of a country like India. And so that the philosophy seems very skewed when you look at the economic status of this country. But it is complex, I know.
I know it's complex, and at this point, there's a very intensive debate, very intensive analysis going on within our teams on all of these questions. That what I was trying to say is that because of the climate change debate and the de-emphasis on fossil fuel as a source of energy, our major shareholders, members of the World Bank, have requested the bank to withdraw generally from supporting fossil fuels. The timing of the debate was not favorable for Kosovo, I fully agree. I think it should not last that much longer. And I'm more than happy to, including our experts, to engage in this debate.
So also I'd like to thank on behalf of the Minister, and I look forward to welcoming you back and wish you a very good time in Kosovo. It's just came here from all nights.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your interest. Anytime. Thank you.